Hello everyone and welcome to another video, and what is another in the mini-series Can It Run ... insert game title here. Now in this series we take older, graphically unimpressive games, at least by modern standards, give them a little bit of a visual overhaul using various tweaks and graphical enhancements, and then see how well they run on the hardware that would have performed just fine with the vanilla game. Why do we do it? Well, the answer's the same every time, because we can. And if you have an older system with an older GPU, you've got one of these older games and you want to know how it would run should you use any of these graphical tweaks, then hopefully this may help you out with answering that very question. But mostly, it's just for fun. So today's title is another Bethesda classic. This is the Elder Scrolls Oblivion. I would argue, and so would many others, that Skyrim is generally the better game, at least for modding. You can make that game look absolutely incredible with a wide variety of visual mods that are available, as well as other gameplay tweaks and so on and so forth. And these days Oblivion is overlooked a little bit, but there are still enhancements available out there, and ones that will make some nice graphical changes to the base or vanilla game. So, without further ado, let's get into it, talk about how the game runs without any mods in its vanilla state, talk about the sort of card you'll need to run it at 60 FPS, as it is, and then I'll talk to you about the graphical overhauls and mods I've used, as well as whether or not it's worth it for the performance that you may lose. As always, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some of you may think these mods look good, some of you may think they look awful, but my advice would be to play through the vanilla game before you make any changes both to the gameplay and the visuals. The same applies to every title I've tested thus far. As it is, the Elder Scrolls Oblivion should run fine with the majority of modern graphics cards. Although 60 FPS is harder to achieve at max settings on entry-level hardware, it's not unrealistic to expect most GPUs from within the last 5 years to handle the game just fine. Oblivion, released way back in 2006 and uses the Gamebryo engine, which was also used to create such other classics as Bully Scholarship Edition and Fallout 3. I still admire the art style of the game because vanilla visuals are part of what form our fond, nostalgic memories of certain titles. There's no denying though that up close it can look a little rough around the edges. I mean, it always has done, to be honest. As far as performance is concerned, the dual fans of my GTX 980 don't even switch on, as the game meets and exceeds 60 FPS. 2010's legendary flagship, the GTX 480, also makes light work of the game, to name another example. This is a card that can be picked up at a small fraction of its original cost today. However, try to run this title on a GeForce 210, one of the worst products ever created in what could be a number of infinite universes, and you'll be left wondering if you accidentally opened up the game executable file in MS PowerPoint. Disabling all anti-aliasing at 1080p does mean that we can hit a 30 FPS average, even if you will be subjected to some frame drops here and there, and by some I mean lots. So, let's move on to the graphical modifications. Don't expect miracles or photorealistic overhauls here, but there are certainly some significant environmental changes and texture enhancements available which will help bring Oblivion a little closer to 2019, even if we can't achieve the same level of change as we could with, say, Obsidian's Fallout New Vegas, another Gamebryo based game. As far as modding is concerned, it's tempting to wait for Sky Oblivion, the ongoing project that's seen a volunteer-based group remake Oblivion in the Skyrim engine, but there is no release date as of yet, so we're left to our own devices for the time being. That's far from a bad thing, as there is plenty of modding fun to be had. Enough chit-chat, let's talk about the changes. Thanks to Bevilex's fantastic and very helpful mod list for Oblivion over at Nexus Mods, I was able to install a load of files without much hassle at all, resulting in a game that now looks like this. I'll leave a link in the description below to the mod list. Included in these changes are textures and environmental mods, floral tweaks and weather alterations, to name a few. I strongly recommend checking out the mod list and installing the files that appeal to you. After all, you don't have to install all of them. First things first, I'll show you a few comparison screenshots before and after the mods, and then we'll move on to performance. So the first screen here gives you a bit of everything. We've got a tree, floor and wall textures, and a bit of fire in the background. What more could you ask for? This is unmodded Oblivion. Comparing this to the tweaked game, which also has the cinematic Oblivion ENB installed, and the textures are sharper or replaced where necessary, we've got new leaves, better flames and enhanced weather effects. Bear in mind, the natural weather mod and cinematic ENB do seem to favour an overcast or rainy weather style, but the sun does come out sometimes, and things do brighten up ever so slightly. This just gives the game a grittier, darker look. Here's a close-up of a flame. Again, this is the vanilla image. It looks okay for a 13-year-old game. Moving on to the modded game, and you can see here that the textures, depth of field and fire have all been changed. The depth of field is totally removable in the ENB file. Usually I turn it off in other games, but I felt it wasn't actually overdone here, like it can be with some ENB presets. Plus it helps to hide some of the still rougher backdrops of the game. Here we have a door, pretty standard on its own, and with 2K textures it's not actually that different. I think this door received some pretty good vanilla textures, so it's more the brickwork around the edges where we see a difference. This is my personal favourite screenshot, not this one exactly because this is the vanilla screenshot, but I thought this would be a nice location to try and wow you with. With everything enabled here, it's like we're actually standing in a river looking at the bank, sort of. You can see the new rock textures stand out quite well here too. So now I'm going to move on to some unscripted gameplay just to talk to you about my experiences with different graphics cards and how they perform with these mods installed. I paired all the GPUs with a Ryzen 5 3600 and 16 gigs of 3200MHz DDR4. I'm also using Windows 10 Pro, which seems to work fine with Oblivion these days. So I touched on the 980's performance at the start. It just so happens to be the card I've got in my system at the moment, and without any mods the game runs fine at 60 FPS. I had to cap it at 60 because it makes things run better. I experienced a few graphical glitches without the cap, but with the cap we're seeing 60 pretty much fluently without mods, and when we've got all the mods enabled there are a few drops here and there, but the average still works out at 60 FPS regardless. When you walk through dense forests that feature long grass, thanks to my long grass mods, you will see a few frame dips to perhaps the low 50s, and some other stutter may occur too, but all in all it's a pretty decent experience on the 980, which is a card that doesn't cost too much these days and is still fairly capable too. Ladies and gentlemen, if any of you suffer from epilepsy or an aversion to flashing images, please look away now, because the GeForce 210 in all its glory just caused us many issues. I was surprised that it was able to run, but it wasn't able to run at more than 2 frames per second, no matter where we were on the map. So all in all, it was a bit of a disaster with this 1GB GeForce 210 graphics card, and even with the SLI hack, it didn't get any better. Now the in-game combat didn't kill me so much as it did the 8800 GTX, an older card now, one that runs the game fairly well at around 50 FPS, albeit at 720p with the vanilla graphics, but when we have all the mods installed here that frame rate does decrease quite significantly. I feel like things should be doing a little better here. The 8800 GTX was a top tier card back in its day, came out around the same time as Oblivion, but yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on with the frame rate, but it doesn't seem to be able to run very well with the ENB and the graphical mods installed, so bear that in mind if you have an old card like this and you want to tweak the game a little bit. With the GTX 480 there's not much to report. The game runs at 60 FPS without any mods installed, and with everything installed that drops down to 45, so in my opinion it's still more than playable. Bear in mind, just like with the 980 and all the other cards, there may be a few hiccups here and there, but at Full HD 1080p you'll have no problem running Oblivion with the 480 and these graphical mods enabled. I don't think it's much of a frame rate sacrifice for the graphical improvement, though of course your opinion may beg to differ. Finally, I thought I had better throw an AMD card in here. We're using the FirePro W5000. This is a sort of workstation card, but I've tested it before on the channel and found that it can still handle itself when it comes to modern games. It performs just fine at 1080p, 60 FPS is no issue with Oblivion and the vanilla settings, though this does drop down to 50 FPS with everything installed, but it will sometimes shoot up to 60, hovering around the mid 50s in emptier areas. All in all, it seems like a pretty decent experience, even on this card. Most of the time, if you have a card, like I say, that's from within the last 10 years, you may be able to squeeze playable frame rates out of a totally overhauled Oblivion, especially if you have one of those higher end offerings or a card that would have been considered higher end way back when. Any card from within the sort of last 5 years should have no issues, even with the overhaul mods enabled. But it's just something you'll have to try yourself. Everyone's hardware is totally different, of course. And yeah, I recommend checking out the mod list, which I'll leave in the description. Have a play about with the Oblivion mods. Play through the game vanilla first time round, as it really is an unmissable classic if you haven't played it already, though I'm sure most of you have. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.